I have the unenviable job of closing the evening after roughly 100 cases of wine, several kegs of Guinness. I'm sure I have your undivided, apt attention. My job is to summarize what's happened in the last 2 days and to put it into a form which even an Irishman can remember. And we'll try to do that, and you'll have to tell me afterwards whether we succeed or not. ITLG was really created to foster entrepreneurial spirit in Ireland as a means of economic development, economic growth, economic independence for the nation of Ireland. And it was created at about a time when there was a slight real estate bubble in Ireland, and there was a need to do something besides invest in real estate, and that something was really recognizing that the 21st century was upon us, and the 21st century was the knowledge century, the century of innovation, the century of wealth creation by using your mind. And what you've heard in the last 2 days have been really a parade of stars, political stars, university president stars, CEO stars, even John Hartnett. And they paraded in front of you, and they have really tried to impart their wisdom to you about what needs to be done for Ireland in the future. And I recognize that this time at night it may be difficult to recall what they have said, so I want to put it in very simple terms, because I have found that after spending 35 years at Intel and having to deal with financial analysts and the media and competition, that you really need a source of wisdom that you can always depend on. And I have found, after intense study, serious study, deep research, that the ultimate source of wisdom for issues of economic development, education, government relations, and many other topics has nothing to do with what our politicians say, nothing to do with those university presidents say, those venture capitalists, the media, but the real ultimate source of wisdom in the world is the Chinese fortune cookie. So what I intend to do tonight is very simply give you 3 Chinese fortune cookies, which I hope you can remember. And those of you who are familiar with Chinese fortune cookies recognize that the easiest way to remember any Chinese fortune is to just put 2 words at the end of it: in bed. Okay, so as we go through here, try to relate to what I'm saying. I know it's late at night, but we'll get started. The first fortune comes from Chef Chu. If you live in Silicon Valley, you know Chef Chu is in Los Altos. I went there one night about 15 years ago by myself. It was probably in the middle of some business crisis or something, and I always dutifully open the fortune cookie at the end of the meal and see what it has to say. And the fortune cookie basically said simply this: the world will always accept talent with open arms. You all just put in bed at the end of that, didn't you? That's the way you remember these things. Now, if you think about that for a minute, it's very simple. What is talent? Talent is education plus passion for what you do. If you have a good education and passion for what you do, there's always a place for you in the world, and the world will accept that talent with open arms. That's why education is so important to Ireland. It's why it's so important to every country on the face of the earth right now. And I said in my opening comments to the education panel today, Irish education hasn't really degraded in the last few decades. The challenge is that other people's education systems have improved dramatically in the last few decades. And to be competitive, to have that Irish talent accepted with open arms, You basically need to continue to be competitive and improve your education system. So the world will always accept talent with open arms, and that talent can be, you can be a poet, a physician, a physicist, a physical therapist, whatever you choose to be. As long as you have talent and passion for what you do, there's a place for you in the world. I can almost guarantee that. So that first fortune basically says education is super important. It's super important to the individual and to the country, and pay attention to it. Ireland will get the results of the 2012 PISA exam later this year. You didn't do so great in the 2009 PISA exam. You fell in some of the OECD rankings. I'm quite sure that some of the developing economies, especially China, India, and others, will continue to improve, so there's going to be continued competition. You need to do more than talk about improving your education system. You need to improve it. The second fortune cookie comes from the Golden Phoenix restaurant in Phoenix, Arizona. It's on 16th Street, if you're looking for it, just off of Camelback. And that fortune very simply says, you cannot win unless you choose to compete. In bed. I can see what you're all thinking right now. The reason for the importance of that fortune is that Ireland has experienced a severe economic downturn. My country, the United States, has done as well. Many other European countries or established economies have experienced economic downturns. In the parallel to those economic downturns has been an economic change in the face of the earth. 3 billion new capitalists have come in, citizens from China, from India, from the former Soviet Union, from Latin America, many from countries with rich educational heritages. Those 3 billion new capitalists want to compete. They've changed the world's free economic system. They've changed the face of competition. It's important for the established economies to recognize if you want to continue to win, you have to choose to compete. You can't complain. You can't try to legislate away competition. You have to choose to compete and do what's necessary. Now, Ireland's doing some great things. Science Foundation Ireland, Enterprise Ireland. We've had some great tours here in the Cork area of programs that are going on to promote entrepreneurial spirit, research, etc. But the important thing for every government and for every society is to recognize in the 21st century, if you want to win, you have to choose to compete. You can't sit on your laurels. It's a little bit like my boss, Andy Grove at Intel, used to say, only the paranoid survive. And unless you're continuously paranoid, you do not choose to compete and you won't survive. The last fortune cookie comes not from the United States, it comes from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And it wasn't really a fortune cookie, it was one of those little thoughts that they put on your pillow at night in your hotel just before you go to bed, pick it up. But it's kind of a fortune. And it said, very simply, a small deed done is better than a great deed planned. I can see all the guys in the audience shaking their head this way and all the ladies going like this. I don't know what that means exactly. But if you think for a moment about that, great deeds planned are really associated with governments, and the larger the government, the greater the deed planned. And you can get no larger than the United Nations and the Millennium Development Goals and so forth. And every 10 or 20 years, the UN comes out with their set of goals. We're going to eradicate illiteracy. We're going to eradicate world hunger. We're going to do such and such. And the larger the goal, it seems the less progress that's made on it. And it's not just the United Nations. The European Union does that. States in the European Union do that. Ireland does that. The United States does that, etc. My contention is that progress is generally made not so much on great deeds planned, but on small deeds done by individuals. And whether it's the individual teacher that spends more time with the student and allows that student to succeed, so the doctor or physician who donates their services to poor people and provides medical care. The program that we've talked a little bit about at this meeting, Coder Dojo, is a small deed done as opposed to a great deed planned. It's what the individual can accomplish and promote something happen. To a degree, it's what John Hartnett, who has my deep appreciation, has done with ITLG in promoting entrepreneurship in Ireland and the association between high-tech people in the US and what goes on in Ireland. That's not a government program. That's a small deed conceived by an individual and then carried forward. The unique thing about this room is it's filled with individuals who have within their capacity to do small deeds. And that is really the backbone of any society. It's not what the government does, but it's what the individual does and what the individual contributes back to society that moves society forward. So the next time that you wake up and you think about these 2 days in Cork and what happened at this conference, I might politely suggest you forget what the politicians have said. You forget what the university presidents have said. You forget what the Chamber of Commerce has said. But you remember the fortunes and what they say. They talk about the importance of education, which is the greatest gift that any society can pass on to the next generation. Without an education, there is very little for the next generation. And without a competitive education, there's even less. And it's incumbent upon us as adults to make sure that the next generation has the best possible, most competitive education so those young people can reach their full potential in the world. It's incumbent upon us to recognize that the 21st century is like no other time in human history. We have just seen half of the world's population go from an isolationist approach to joining the world's free economic system. 3 billion new capitalists. Never happened before in the history of mankind, where half of the world's population, almost overnight, has joined a new economic system. We have a saying in the high-tech industry: market shares are won and lost in periods of transition. And you can think of the classic examples of this. Think of the transition of Motorola to Nokia to Apple to perhaps Android and Samsung in the cellular phone business. Dramatic changes in market share with technology transitions. The world is just seeing the biggest economic transition it's ever experienced. Market shares will be won and lost, and the market shares are not corporate market shares as much as they are country market shares or regional market shares. Europe, the United States, and Japan, the economic powers of the 20th century, are in danger of losing their market share in the 21st century unless they choose to compete and do compete. And lastly, please don't forget the power of the individual. It is not that we sit in our chairs and point to the government and say the government is not doing its job. The real power of change, the real power of moving forward, the real power of success, in my opinion, rests with the individual and individual initiative. And if we ever forget that, and we ever relax into the position of saying that's someone else's problem and not our problem, then we're doomed to failure. Let me extend the thanks of ITLG to all the people that made this conference a success. And please, please, please don't forget those 3 fortune cookies. Thank you.